Dude, we're going to Mars.
David Stahl.
Yes, sir.
Very excited to have you today.
Glad to be here.
As I was telling you before we started recording, you're one of the big inspirations of why we're doing this podcast, or why I started talking to people. When we started, as you know, we were doing these interviews, just a crazy idea we had, and go out there. We started at Isla Blanca, and then for some reason, there was this photo that you had put out. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Yeah, there was a photo that you put out. It was on social media. Everybody was, I don't know how it caught a little fire around here, right? And so we're like, let's talk to him. And Renee was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to send him a message. And you responded right away. We didn't know anything about you. We didn't know who you were or anything. And then we interviewed you at Starbase or Boca Chica, whatever you want to call it now. And I remember that the conversation we had apart from the interview was so good because of all the stuff we're going to talk about right now. And the interview we did was kind of cheesy. And I don't know if you remember it, but it was just kind of like, and just trying to get some funny comments or stuff like that. So when we came back, and it was all windy and you couldn't really hear and stuff. And I was just like, there's so many interesting people that we should be doing this long form, and we should be getting actually like in depth of what's going on here, right? And getting a more like stable idea. I have a feeling that, or it feels to me that everything moves so fast, especially with this guy, right? Elon is like on fire. So everybody's moving fast, right? And we don't get like a chance to sit, rest, and talk and kind of figure this out. So I'm very happy that you're here. Tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Okay, well, currently, the last 10 years, more lived in Fayetteville, Texas. Actually, 20 years. Time flies. Little small town, about an hour east of Austin. I'm a retired city manager.
Yes.
I grew up in the space environment. My dad was a 2-decade employee and public works director for...
What did he do?
He was the director of public affairs for the Johnson Space Center.
Director of public affairs.
Yes.
Break that down to me. Does that mean he's the one that talks to people?
Well, he has people that talk to people.
Okay.
He is in senior staff, and so they run the public information office, which interfaces with all the media. They interface for the astronauts and for NASA operations at the center.
That's pretty huge.
And so, yeah, that's.
And this is when did he start, more or less?
He started when I was in high school, my senior year of high school.
What year? I don't want to out you, but what year more or less was that?
1975.
1975.
Yeah, and that was really a very pivotal time in NASA. It was the end of Apollo was wrapping up.
Yes.
And so he arrived for the Apollo Soyuz, which was the test mission where they would, for the first time, link American and Soviet spacecraft in space. And so that was, and it was the end of the era of Apollo.
Right.
So there were a lot of people who were retiring and a lot of people were coming on board. And so that meant he was there from the very beginning of the shuttle all the way through the end of the shuttle, space shuttle program. And I grew up in that area, having graduated from high school, and so was in that environment of astronauts and...
This is in Houston?
Space workers. Yes, south of Houston.
South of Houston.
Yeah, in 75, it wasn't even actually in the city of Houston.
Right.
It
was way out
later
there.
Incorporated into Houston. That's right.
And so you moved, where were you from? Where were you living before?
Long Beach, California.
Wow. So you guys are from California, like originally, your parents?
Yep.
And they're like, let's go to NASA.
Well, my dad had a really unusual career path, much like my own. And he worked for a company and was recruited away by NASA to come to Houston and be the public affairs director. And And so I was not keen, tell you that. I was about
Well,
to be
you're
my
saying it's
senior
your
in
senior
high
year,
school.
yeah. So you left your senior year from California.
I did. And it was the same high school my dad graduated from and my aunt graduated from. And I lettered as a sophomore. And so, you know.
Yeah, sure you had girlfriends.
Big man on campus.
Sure you had
right?
all this, yeah.
So I really was not crazy about leaving for my senior year. And I tried hard to talk him into letting me stay, but it didn't work. And so we moved to Texas, and everything changed. Texas was not what I expected it to be in a lot of ways. And, you know, my plans for the future all shifted with that. And there were new opportunities, and I got to do a lot of interesting things.
Did you go to college here in Texas?
I started, but then my goal at that point was to own an electrical company. And so I started in electrical technology courses, and I got about a year in and discovered that college education wasn't required for anything that I wanted to do, and that I could pursue that and start making money. And so I did. I dropped out, got my electrician's license, and about 2 years had my own electrical company and specialized in shipyards and machine shops. And
really?
And
there? In that area?
In the Clear Lake area,
wow.
Texas.
Yeah.
And, you know, was young and single and making a good living and having a good time. And I lived with a lot of volunteer time. And so, you know, I was in the volunteer fire department, and then I ran for city council.
Did you win?
I lost the first time.
Okay.
I ran against an Air Force colonel, retired, and a Coast Guard commander, retired. And I lost to the Air Force, but I beat the Coast Guard. And so then I decided I'd run again, and to be able to overcome the fact that I was 20 and they had all this administrative experience, that I needed specific experience. So I went to the police chief and said, look, I want to go to the police academy. I want to have graduated the next time I run for city council, because the position was divided up and it was a public safety position.
Okay.
I had fire well under control, being in the volunteer department there and having worked my way up. And so I did that. And then I ran for council and I won. And then I decided, well, I can go be a volunteer, what they call a reserve peace officer somewhere. And I asked our police chief there in El Lago, Texas, where would you go? And he said, oh, I'll go to Nassau Bay, which is directly across from the Space Center.
Right.
He said, they've been looking for reserves and they haven't hired anybody. Nobody's come up to what they would accept. So I went and applied, and I became their first non-paid reserve police officer. And that got me right into Nassau Bay.
How big is this town?
About 5,000 population.
Wow.
And the town that I was a city councilman in was El Lago, Texas. At that time, the population was about 3,200.
So Houston is, so this is like outside of Houston, right? At that time. So this is more like, what would you say, like 30 minutes?
Yeah, about 25 minutes from downtown Houston.
Okay.
South. Yeah, so you know, if you were in Houston and you were traveling south towards Galveston,
right,
you would come to the edge of Houston, which at that time was about the Hobby Airport.
Okay, and
then you go a little further and you get down to Ellington Air Force Base, which was an Air Force base at the time, and then just slightly further was where NASA was at. City of Webster, it would be on the Gulf Freeway then, and their population was about 2,500.
Wow.
In 75, and so they were not the largest city. Nassau Bay was good size, driven by NASA contractors and its proximity to NASA.
So by this time, is your dad still there?
Yes, yeah, he had arrived in 75 as the director of public affairs, and I got elected to city council in 77, and that was in April, and in December of 77, I became a unpaid reserve officer in Nassau Bay, and you know, it was the Wild West then.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was not much out there. a lot of cows between Houston and the Space Center, and 6-man police department. So it's hard for people to get vacation time.
And when we're talking about the Space Center, we're not talking about the Space Center that's there today, right? There's not like museums and all this stuff yet, right?
No, that's correct. Yeah, it was a working facility. They did have a visitor center. That was one of the things that my father fixed while he was there. It was just not much of a museum. They had things like pins that were used to sign documents and none of the glory stuff. People don't realize that all of the NASA artifacts of spaceflight, when they're surplus by NASA, when they're no longer necessary, they automatically transfer to the Smithsonian.
Really?
And NASA doesn't own them anymore.
Wow, that's like an arrangement that was done a long time ago or something.
Yes, it was. The Smithsonian has this special relationship with the government to be the museum and the artifact
the historian
collector
of everything.
Yeah. And so it makes sense on that level, but it's a little bit odd that NASA has flight hardware that they would like to hang on to and tout.
Well, they have an amusement center, so it would make sense to like use these,
Yeah. So, today there's Space Center Houston, which is a huge public operation, and all of the space hardware in there is on loan from the Smithsonian.
Jeez, really?
Yeah.
I've been there. I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So they give everything to the Smithsonian, and then Smithsonian lends them back to them.
Yeah.
Whatever they're not using, or
Yeah. The sad thing is the Smithsonian has so much to try to manage. They don't have the financial resources to maintain everything, and so if you've Indiana Jones, where he goes through the warehouse with all the. That's a little bit what the Smithsonian's like.
Yeah,
they got more than they can wrap their arms around, and so there are things, like one of the space shuttles that just sat outside deteriorating for years because
they didn't even have a warehouse to put it in.
A place to put it. Wow. The rocket park, what they call a rocket park, where they have a Saturn rocket that's laying on its side, was on public display at the Johnson Space Center for years and still is, sat outside and was just deteriorating. And they were able to raise funds to put a cover over it so that they could preserve it, because otherwise it was just going to rot away.
Yeah.
So anyhow, but that's the environment I grew up in.
Yeah. So you're there. Peace officer, what did you call it? You're a peace officer?
Reserve,
yeah.
The police officer. I was going to say, with 6-man department, they needed reserves because nobody could get vacation time.
Right.
If somebody was sick and covering. And so here I am, 20 years old, and working shifts by myself out there in the Wild West. And it really was far enough out of Houston that you'd get a criminal element that would come from Houston, commit crimes there because they felt like they were in the middle of nowhere, and then run back to Houston. And we had robberies at gunpoint every week.
Really?
In this little quiet town, and people didn't realize that was all going on because it doesn't happen when everybody's out about.
Right.
But so I was involved in that, and eventually decided if I was going to do this, I really enjoyed it. If I was going to do this, might as well let them pay me. So I held off as long as I could, almost a year, and finally said, okay, fine. Reduced my hours because I was working 70 hours volunteering.
Jeez.
They were, and so that launched me into that. And I went up through the ranks to assistant chief, and was a fire and arson investigator. That intrigued me, having done the fire service stuff in Seabrook. And so I got that certification and started teaching at the Houston Fire Academy, side hustle.
Right.
And enlarged the group of people that I knew and influence. And then when the fire marshal was fired, they asked me if I'd step in as fire marshal.
Jeez.
So I moved from the police department over to City Hall for the fire marshal's office to cover that. And then
now this is yours, right?
Yeah.
So how big is it now? Like if it was 5,000 population when you got there.
Yeah.
Now you're the fire marshal. How is it the same size?
You know, it really did stay about the same size because geographically it was larger then than it is now because the city of Houston and Webster sued and took away some of the territory.
Right.
They wanted the commercial, which didn't really affect population much. And so it's about the same size, about 4,500 today. It's very, very urban now, though.
Right.
You know,
well, it's really connected to everything.
It
now,
is.
right?
It is. And Houston abuts it, and Pasadena, and Webster, and League City. So now it's all landlocked, and it's not geographically going to get any bigger. But and you know, it's where a lot of the astronauts live. So I had a lot of contact with astronauts and with NASA employees, and I eventually rose up to where I was city manager of Nassau Bay, and you know, police chief worked for me then.
Yeah.
Which that was kind of fun, I suppose, for me because it flipped. I was his assistant chief, and then I went to fire marshal, and then they decided to keep me over in City Hall and make me assistant city manager. And then when the city manager left, I became city manager, and the police chief worked for me.
Right.
So you know,
flipped it on him.
Yeah. But that all gave me a very unique perspective on space and the space program.
Well, this is where it gets very interesting to me. And this is where our conversation started in Boca Chica or Starbase, right? Yeah. So you started telling me that you were the city manager of Nassau. And this is what year was it that you became city manager?
Oh, it would have been about 1992.
1992. Okay. By this time, do they have the museum? Do they have everything going like they do now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now you're having tourism.
Yes.
At that time.
Correct.
Okay. That's what makes it very interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's what this conversation is interesting to me, right? You're at a point where you're city manager of a town that's small, right? Way smaller than this town, but you're connected to huge hubs. And you're now pretty much tourism, I guess, right?
Yes and no. Small, it just depends on how you quantify that.
Right.
You have population, you have geographic area. So Nassau Bay was small from both those perspectives, about 2 square miles, about 4,500 population. So that's pretty small, except we butt right up against the Johnson Space Center.
Right.
And so we had hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space,
right,
which is no population, which is all NASA contractors.
People coming in and out.
You know, Loral, IBM, GE, all the various NASA contractors were in those buildings. And so our daytime population would just bloom by the thousands of employees that would come in and work in all these buildings in support of NASA. And then even prior to Space Center Houston, the Johnson Space Center was the second largest tourist attraction in the state of Texas, only second to the Alamo.
Well, that's where I was headed. So what were the numbers? Do you remember?
I don't remember the specific numbers, but they were huge, and they were large enough that we had over 600 hotel rooms in Nassau Bay. So you're talking about a small town,
right? But
we had a 14-story Hilton, we had a 7-story Resort Inn. We had a 4-story Holiday Inn, 2 buildings, all in this small city. We had, five or six buildings that were 6 stories or taller that were office buildings. So that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of property tax and a lot of sales tax. You know, we had a shopping center, grocery store, retail.
Hot funds.
We had all of that stuff along the front, and then yes, hotel occupancy tax.
Yeah.
With all those hotel rooms, we pretty much had a corner on the market, except at the bottom tier. If you went out to Webster, you had like Motel 6 and some of the motel type properties. But as far as hotels went, for a long time we had no competition at all. And then when we did, it was across the lake, so it was, you know, 25 minutes, 20 minutes of driving now with new traffic to get to another resort hotel. And so those 3, well, actually we had a 4th one. We had a Quality Inn, became Space Center Inn. So we had 4 hotels, motels, and we kind of had that market cornered. And between there and Seabrook and Kemah, there was also nothing. And so one of the things I did when I became assistant city manager was took over tourism. And our tourism budget was about $450,000.
Okay.
And so We were second in the state in per capita tourism revenue behind Addison, Texas,
Wow.
suburb of Dallas. And so we had funds to work with, and we did a lot of things to make sure we kept those funds coming in. And there's a big ripple effect. You know, you have.
Oh wait, that's where I wanted. Like, what are those things that you did? That's what I want to find out, right? Like,
Sure.
We're in this moment where this type of tourism, and you see it, right? You're kind of a part-time resident now of our community here in Cameron County, and what I see is that obviously this tourism is growing and growing as Starbase keeps growing and growing, and it's nonstop. It's obviously the attention of the launches creates the most push, but still people are coming now that there's a lot of work being done, and it's not really like as active or as exciting as a launch. So what were some of the things that you saw or that you think we can do here so far?
Well, we did a number of things. The tourism kind of broke into two halves for us. You had those people who were coming to see the Space Center, which was the largest driver, was with that. And that was largely families. Whether it was just 2 people or it was 5 people, it was a family vacation trip.
Right.
And Space Center Houston was the destination. So for that particular group, what we tried to do is expand their opportunities so that when they arrived for that, we gave them other things to do.
X and Y.
The rule of thumb that I operated under at that time was 4 hours of activity would generate an overnight. So we tried to find enough activity to hold you in our community for 4 hours so that you would look at your watch and decide you
might as well
should
stay
find
here.
a hotel room.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you make that decision, now I get a second bite at the apple, because the next day you're going to have breakfast, you're going to stop
Right.
and fuel your car, you're going to maybe do a little more shopping, maybe you'll
Right.
find more things to do. And so it's taking that, what's a stop, to making it an overnight.
Right.
And if it was already planned to be an overnight, I want to make a second overnight.
Right.
If I can't do either one of those, I want to give you a reason to come back again. And from a marketing perspective, it's always less expensive to get someone to return than to get someone to come the first time.
Right.
So recognizing that, you work really hard on the people that arrive to give them a reason to come back, or to prevent anything that would discourage them from coming back.
Right.
So you try to, smooth everything out so it's not a hassle being there, whatever that hassle is. They don't like something, parking is hard, your things are not accessible,
Right, it's not.
all of those things. Then the other half of that equation are the business travelers, the people that come to NASA or
'Cause
the
they gotta
NASA
work,
area
yeah.
for business. And you want to approach those people and say, you can see why you want to bring your family back.
Right.
You may have come here for a week to work on a piece of project that's related to NASA or not. I don't care why you came, but you're here on business, and we want to show you that this is a place you should bring your family back to go out and enjoy the waterfront, or go boating, or go to one of the museums or nature centers, or whatever the case may be. And so so there were those two different spheres of
Right.
people that we were approaching. I'll give you an example with the business traveler. Is most of your families arrive by car.
Right.
Most of your business travelers arrive by plane. So when we targeted the business travelers, we did ad campaigns in Southwest Airlines Spirit magazine. They were the budget airline. Most of the people that are coming on business are not flying in first class, and they're not really our target market.
Right.
So we targeted like Southwest Airlines, and we would run an ad campaign, and we would promote our hotels in that, and one of the really successful campaigns I had was Space Shuttle campaign, and that was, I had a company make for us inflatable custom 9-inch space shuttles, and had NASA on it, and instead of the Endeavor or Challenger
Right.
or one of those names, it said Nassau Bay, and collapsed up. This inflatable thing was about the size of a coaster, and we would provide them to the hotels. And you tear this out of the magazine and bring it to the hotel when you stay.
And they give you one.
Yeah. The hotels were real detractors of it. They thought it was not a good use of the money. None of the business travelers were going to do that. But I convinced them that we're going to give it a go, and the Hilton was the funniest one because they didn't even want to take any of the balloons, what we call them balloons, the inflatables.
Like, nobody's going to show up.
Yeah, we don't even need those.
Right.
Nobody's going to bring a coupon into the Hilton. They're too good for that. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you 10, and you let me know when you need more. And what we asked them to do, the hotel to do, is to write the zip code of the visitor on the tear out.
Okay.
And then give that to us, and we'll replace your inflatable.
Yeah. So you're doing analytics, old style.
Old school.
Yeah.
And so first day, Hilton called up and said, we need more, and don't just bring us 10. And they were handing out about 175 a month.
Wow.
And so you don't really know how far your reach was because you're always just getting the part of the iceberg that's out of the water. The people who actually tore it out and brought it to the counter.
Right.
And we didn't require you to stay there. We just take it to any of these hotels
and give it to
present at the counter. Yeah. And so that was very successful, and it made believers out of the hotels because they could see real movement because they kept asking for more. And then the next thing that happened is I had to make an arrangement to sell them to the hotels because they wanted to use them on the tables when they had banquets. They wanted to use them in their own promotions. And so that was really successful. And in the end, we end up working with Remax Realty and a group to create a hot air balloon of the space shuttle, which then was used at balloon festivals across the country. And of course, it also said
Nassau Bay. So you sent balloons.
Yeah, hot air balloon.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and it hot air balloons don't last forever.
Right.
I think about 3 or 4 years.
How much is a hot air balloon?
A lot of money.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right. It's like
a lot of money, and there's really only one company that builds those really big custom balloons, so they've got that market cornered. But it was so successful, we built a second one when that one retired.
Wow.
And so, that was a promotion putting Nassau Bay in the spotlight, and of course everybody thinks that the Space Center's in Houston,
right?
And they don't, and that was a difficulty we had. So
branding,
not much different than the difficulty you might have differentiating. Right. Brownsville from South Padre, for example.
Yeah, and now Starbase. And so it gets even more convoluted, right?
And so you have people who say, I'm going to go to see NASA, and so they book a hotel downtown Houston.
Yeah.
Well, you're nowhere near NASA downtown Houston.
Right.
So, we had to overcome that. And one of the things we did in promotion there was you have this tourism money that you're using and you want to use it the most effective way you can.
Right.
And one of the things that I found was people are always much more careful with their own money than yours. They'll spend years on anything.
Right, anything.
And it doesn't have to be effective. They just want to spend it. So I did a lot of things in promotion where we did it kind of like cost sharing. So if you have a hotel and you want to put a billboard up, I will pay 50% of your billboard. Now, there were caps.
Right.
I'm not sure anybody ever met the caps. But if you want to do a billboard, I'll pay 50% of it. You send us your invoices, your paid invoices from the billboard company, and then we'll rebate you 50%. Yeah. But there was a provision. It had to say our tagline for our tourism promotion, and it had to say Nassau Bay, Texas. And it had to meet this specs. You couldn't just have it some little thing that nobody sees.
You need to be able to see it.
Exactly. And so they saw the value of that. I mean, the cost of billboards.
Right.
At that time, $500 to $700 a month, and if you got half of that paid, that's real money.
Yeah.
Particularly in the 90s.
And is it kind of like here, like when how you're arriving to the island and you see all these billboards?
Yeah.
Is it kind of like from Galveston to you or from Houston to you, like that?
Yes, from Houston to us.
Okay.
Right. And so to the extent that they believe that the billboard is bringing them business,
right,
they're spending their money,
right,
and then we're supplementing that. And If they don't see value on the billboard for them, then they stop doing it, and we're not paying anything. So we're not really giving anything free away.
Everybody's vested in the project, and if it works, everybody wins, and if it doesn't, everybody loses less.
Yes.
Right?
Right. Well, and what's more is if it's not working, they're not inclined to keep doing it.
Right.
Because they got money. They got skin in the game.
Right.
And along the billboard thing, I had a funny fight with TxDOT. At the time, it was fairly new. They had what they called the logo signs, which are the signs you see for services that are off and exit, where they tell you the restaurants, the gas stations, just says food, gas.
Right.
And they have the logo of the business and how many miles and what exit
Yes.
you get off. Well, the criteria said that it had to be within so many miles of the exit, and we were just beyond that. So there was no business in Nassau Bay, hotels in particular, that were close enough to the exit that you would take
To qualify, yeah.
to qualify for the logo sign. And kind of beat my head against the wall at TxDOT with that. And then I thought, well, this is silly. We put up our own.
Right.
We didn't put them on the state right-of-way, but I bought billboards and replicated what the logo sign looked like and put just our businesses on it.
Right.
And we just kind of didn't do the ones between the exit and
the thing, of course.
and the city of Nassau Bay. Just completely mimicked it. It was pretty amusing.
Yeah. So okay. What I want to know a little bit about then is the tourism then. Did you see like an influx? Did you see it grow during the time you were there, or had it already been growing before you got there?
Yes, we did. We did see it grow because we did several things to quantify that. One, like the inflatables, we could gauge the success of that ad by how many of those were turned in and what the ad looked like and where we placed it. And frankly, we were very budget minded, so we never did more than a quarter page. And that was a little bit of marketing science as well.
Right.
If I go a quarter page, I either have editorial or I have 3 other ads,
On
minimum 2 others on the same page. So that keeps the reader on the page longer. If I did a full page, it's too easy to flip past me. So it's kind of counterintuitive to spend less money, and I think I got more exposure. So we did things like that. But we did other things that you could see the ripple effect, because once you have the people there and they spend the night, you want them spending money. So you want them to go into your retail and these various things. And so we tried to make the rest of the community more attractive to that. So, and incentivize them to stop and to do things. And they're tourists.
Right.
And so one of the things that I did was I joined IAPA. It's a group, it's an international group of amusement and theme parks.
Okay.
And that sounds silly for a city, but I went to their conference and they have workshops for people who run theme parks. And theme parks have exactly the same goal I do.
Right.
Once somebody comes in the door, they want to keep them there as long as they can.
Right.
And then they want them to come back. And so the parallels were really tremendous. And so I started going to the marketing workshops as a member of IAPA and gained a lot of insight. And I'll give you an example. One of the things they talk about is at a theme park, a lot of the stuff's aimed at kids. Kids aren't spending the money.
Right.
Who's spending the money?
The parents, yeah.
The parents. But more than the parents, grandparents.
Grandparents, yeah, that's bigger.
And so it's not keep getting the kids to want to stay, because that's easy.
Right.
How do you get the grandparents to want to stay? And the way you get the grandparents to stay isn't a bigger roller coaster.
Right.
Okay? It's putting benches where they can sit while the kids do stuff.
Yes.
And putting benches that in places that then put them in proximity of retail, because they're the one buying stuff. And if the kids come back to where they're at, wherever that is, and there's something there that appeals to the kids for purchase, bingo. And so I took that approach and started looking at the city as if we were a theme park.
Right.
What would we do that if one person in the car wanted to stop at this shopping center, this strip, and look at something, that it would make the other people in the car who weren't interested willing to do that? Well, shade trees, benches, making what it may be an esplanade area alongside the road or shopping center look more like a little park area.
Right.
And it worked. And that was easy to document, because you put some nice benches out and you just see if they're getting used.
Yeah. And That's very interesting approach, and it ties in my mind, right? It ties into this new downtown, $10 million Elon Musk fund, right? And what they're trying to do, what they're trying to figure out in the city to do with it, and that is the approach that I think would be amazing, right? You've been to downtown,
Sure.
so it's interesting, but it's never had the ability to hold. Right, to hold the people. You might go, like you went, but you're right. I don't. There's the market square, whereas
Right.
the most example, like the most likely your example, right? That's the only place where you can have a bench, kind of sit down, park kind of attitude, or park kind of feel. But if you walk a block away, that's it. And if you walk a block the other way, there's some restaurants, there's some stuff. But there's no like hangout feel like a theme park, right? Like this corner's interesting,
Right.
that stuff's interesting. I'm sure you've seen the mural of Elon now.
Yes.
So that's private sector kind of thing. That wasn't the city doing it, but I feel like that could really help that area because it also. I don't know if you've gone all the way to the zoo from there, but that connects to the zoo. The zoo, I think, has about 1 million people a year visiting. So that, I think, could help that whole amusement park. That I'm sorry, I just connected it to me because I was like,
Sure.
that's very interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And when you talk about Market Square, you're talking about the old city halls and between Elizabeth and Washington.
Well, so Market Square is on Adams and Washington. 10th and I think it's 11th and 12th.
Okay.
Right there.
Yeah.
And so it's a little park. I don't know if you saw it. It's got a clock and it's got
Okay.
So, but it's not the. I think you went to the county court, which is the amazing building. But you went to
I'll give you another example. That's not as much tourism; it is economic development. I'm a city manager of Columbus, Texas, and did an analysis of where our sales tax revenue was generated, and Columbus was on Old Highway 90. The courthouse was on 90. That was the main road between Houston and San Antonio. And then they built Interstate 10. And when they did, they moved south of the town like a bypass.
Right.
And so then now it's about 3 miles south of where the square is. And then you get new businesses that build up along the interstate.
Yes.
Well, with that shifted really the revenue generators for sales tax all moved down to that intersection. And you could draw a circle of 3,000 feet, and 80% of all the sales tax was generated
there
off that intersection instead of the town square. Now, the town square was charming and looked great, and had businesses, but they weren't really revenue generators. And TxDOT was doing a lousy job of maintaining the interstate on and off ramps there, and the bridge, the overpass. And so I went to TxDOT and asked them to up their game and to paint the overpass and to do a municipal maintenance agreement with us, and we would take over maintenance of the on and off ramps.
Okay.
And we went through there, and they were just like any urban on and off ramps: litter, trash, high grass, very unattractive. And so we went through and sucked up all of the stuff there and started mowing that on a regular schedule and landscaping it and making it attractive. At the same time, I worked with all the businesses there and asked them if they would go 24-hour, and if they wouldn't go 24-hour, would they leave their lights on 24 hours? And we ended up creating a nighttime oasis for people traveling between Houston and San Antonio, where all of a sudden this intersection was like the beacon of a Buc-ee's.
Yes.
And people would say, oh, there's a place that's all lit up, that's got a McDonald's and a Jack in the Box and a Whataburger, let's stop there. And there's also a Walmart and an H-E-B and a whole lot of independent restaurants. And that was very successful in all of a sudden drawing people in. And some of the businesses said, well, we'll go 24 hours or we'll go to midnight for a couple months to humor you. And then when they discovered that there was
Right,
business,
there was business.
then I didn't have to sell them on it anymore.
One of the main things here that I've been and I've been telling people, right, the people that I know, anyway, not that anybody listens to me, but lighting, downtown, would make a huge difference here because at night, because they're old buildings and because it's historic and so you can't put a lot of like fancy stuff, signs and that kind of thing. But lighting just makes it look alive. Even though there's restaurants that you'll go by at whatever, it gets dark at 8:30, you'll go by and you can't even see inside the restaurant. So it kind of looks like it's closed. It doesn't look like there's activity, like there's stuff going on. And lighting all over that area, I think would really like now make it live. Like what you said, now there's reason to be there at night. And there's reason to even have families out there at night, all kinds of things like what you're saying.
Yeah, and lighting emotes safety.
Yes.
Yeah, people feel safer when there's light. They feel more inviting to the area, to wherever the destination is. I would say that probably the most valuable advice I ever got in economic development came from a developer that I had worked on a project and got him to come to take a look. And an international company, they were doing projects, and we were an eligible location for them. And I got them to come down and to visit us and spend a few days. And, I was at Nassau Bay for 21 years, and it wasn't, all steady growth or loss. So we had one of those 7-story hotels ran into a little problem with the IRS. And so the marshal's office seized it and closed it up. And then it sat there.
Oh.
And we couldn't do anything with it because it was it was a mess.
Yeah.
And eventually they put it up for sale. And then next to that was a shopping center that was very ill-conceived and went out of business, and so it sat vacant. And so I had this block, a big block, that was really an eyesore and a problem for us. And so I was looking for a developer to come in and take the shopping center portion of it, about 7 acres, and do this project. And they came in and they visited, and it was a great visit. And on the last day, we picked him up at the Hilton to take him back to the airport. And we drove by this hotel. And I asked him, okay, the elephant in the room, we never said anything about this hotel. Is that having a real big negative impact on your consideration of doing this project? And he looked at me deadpan and said, absolutely none. He said, I could write down on a piece of paper right now 3 names, and you could seal it in an envelope. And if we do our project there, that'll have a name of who bought that and what they're going to put there.
Wow.
I'm not worried about that.
Right.
He says, but I'll tell you what I am worried about. And this was the gold mine. And I used this from then on, and it's really worked well for me. He said, I'll tell you what does bother me, is we just drove through that intersection, and this was 4 lanes both directions, big intersection in our town, and at the corner closest to the project. And he said, we just went through that intersection, and I can't tell what the name of that street was. He said, and he rattled off a couple other things, and he said, my experience has been, you want me to come in here and do a $50 million project, and I can't tell what the street is and these other things. And he says, I go all over the country finding locations, and everywhere I go, they promise me anything we want.
Right.
And he said, and if we do the project, they do everything we want. And I can come back 3 years to the day from the day we opened the doors, and they won't be doing anything they weren't doing the day before I showed up to look at it.
Right.
Everybody falls off the horse. I said, so you want to know what's important to me? Is I want to look at what you're doing today before I come here.
Right.
He says, I want to see street signs. I want to see street lighting. I want to look at the curbs. I look at the sidewalks. He says, I don't care about the private property condition because I know what I'm going to do with that.
Right.
He said, but I don't have control over the street and potholes and,
Yeah.
And he said, and that's what I expect 3 years after I open the door, because everybody forgets the promises now that they've got you.
Right. Yeah, now you're stuck.
Yeah. Now, we didn't have potholes, but where that shopping center was at, the sidewalks were a mess. And so, and some other things. And we didn't have the signs, street signs. I mean, we had residential style street signs. They're a little larger, but nothing, if you drove down, you'd know what it was. So that just pushed my button. His project aside,
Right.
I got this block I got to do something with.
Well, that was the message, right? It doesn't matter if I'm coming or not.
Right.
If you fix this, the next guy.
Exactly. And so I went to council and said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put backlit street signs up, big ones that you can see. I'm going to make sure all the street lighting in here is upgraded. I'm going to put banners on the street light poles, like something's happening here.
Right.
I'm going to repair all the sidewalks and the curbs here and fix any drainage issues we've got. And they're like, why would you do that in front of vacant buildings? And I said, because I don't want them to always be vacant buildings.
Right.
And we did that, and within a year, 3 other developers came in and bought pieces of it, and it all turned over.
Well, it's weird. It's kind of like dress for the job that you want kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
It's true. And I think, well, the reason we're talking a lot about tourism and stuff is because obviously Starbase or SpaceX and everything they're doing. So it's a very interesting time in this community, and we're not dressed for the part yet, and we're in the middle of this trying to figure out what it is. And the weird thing about here is that we're different communities, as you know, right? You're at the island right now. You have to come to Brownsville to go to Starbase, and in between there's a couple other little towns, and everybody's participating in this whole new era of tourism and activity. You mentioned business travelers, right? As we know, this last week, Tesla rented every hotel in our town, so you can't even get a hotel in our town. So that's new, right? I don't think that's ever happened before. I was told, like, this is crazy. I was told by several of the hotel people, right? It's like, it's crazy. They came in and they actually, like, people got left out of that were here, that were going to come with their family and stuff, because they would get all the rooms immediately, no questions asked. I think they said, and I don't know if you're familiar with our hotels, but I don't think we have, well, I know we don't have any 4-star, but I don't know if we have 3-star. We might have 1 or 2, right? They're probably 2.5. Most are probably 2.5, in that range. All franchises. But I think they got to like 300 a night.
Wow.
Yeah. In a week. Because Elon's like,
yeah,
I need all of them.
And that's what convention business does for you, too.
Right. That's where we don't have that. We don't have a lot of things, right? But we don't have convention space. There's one coming in Cameron County. Yeah, I know.
You used to.
Yeah.
I came down here and took classes and participated in state of Texas programs in the hotel, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was just a Brownsville hotel, but right down off of International by the Fort. Now
Fort Brown. Yeah, Fort Brown doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
The university ate it up.
Yeah, they sure did. I drove by there to show my wife where I took classes back in the early 80s.
No, yeah, it's all gone. Yeah. All gone.
There's nothing there but parking lot, which is sad.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I used to party there in high school. Yeah, that was a fun spot. It's just the thing about a community like ours, I think, Cameron County as a whole, is that governmental entities make up really the biggest economic development, right? There are some companies that come and go, but our biggest employer is the school district, right? Probably one of the 3rd, 4th biggest is the university, right? There's some companies at the port, there's some things, but the majority is government entities actually taking the brunt of the economy. And this SpaceX thing, that's a new, way bigger thing, more attention than I think anybody ever thought was going to come to the area.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's an amazing thing what one company or one entity can do to shift everybody. And that's what's going on here, right? That's the reason I'm doing the podcast. There's a shift going on, right? I like to say in my is that we're a very historical community, right? And you've seen downtown, and I think we're the second biggest historical downtown, or second oldest historic downtown in Texas, next to San Antonio, next to the Alamo. Okay, nobody really knows that, but and if you go through I think we've had a part in every war that's happened in the U.S. Something happened in Brownsville for every war that happened in the U.S. And we're in the middle of another historical situation,
right?
But we're in it.
Yep,
we're living it.
It's real time,
right? This guy showed up, right? And there's stories like that of Brownsville, which are amazing. These guys show up, and there's economic booms here that are crazy. Yeah. One of them, I think, was cotton, right? When cotton became illegal, if you were in the South, you couldn't send your cotton to the North because the Civil War, but you could send Mexican cotton. So Brownsville becomes an importer of cotton. Well, Mexico, but it's here really that all this stuff, and there was a boom. And so these types of things happen to our town. It's very strange. And it's happening now. And we're in the middle of it now. And it's a very strange moment. And all these people are coming, right? And like I said, I already call you a temporary resident. But a lot of interesting people are coming, which means the community is going to change. The culture is going to change. Everything is shifting. And that's kind of what's very interesting now. And what do you think about all of that? Like, how do you see us coming from you came in January the first time, or
yes,
like for this yes.
It had been a number of years since. Well, and I really hadn't. I've been down for conferences and conventions in South Padre Island off and on through the years, but I hadn't been back to Brownsville.
And to be specific, you came because you're crazy about rockets and space, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're finding, right? There's a lot of people that just come because of this.
Yes, and so the 70, almost 80 days that I've spent here this year have all been driven by SpaceX. And I say that, but that doesn't mean when I'm here I'm exclusively doing SpaceX.
No, we do what we're trying to do what you're doing, what you were doing over there, right? It's like how do we get you to restaurants and shops and all that?
Yeah. So I guess you talk about your largest employers being the school district and the university or the colleges, and that's very common everywhere.
Right.
But when you talk about tourists, I have a particular fondness for tourism development because tourists are very low impact on the community. There's a little bit of impact in law enforcement to make your tourists feel safe and comfortable. It's not that the tourists are unruly, although certainly they can be. I mean, there's certainly a lot of Mardi Gras in Galveston or spring break at Padre where you have some extracurricular activities to deal with, but by and large, tourism is very low impact. They bring money into the community. You're not just churning money here. You're not just, spending more within your community. You're bringing in outside dollars. That's very positive. And a lot of people misunderstand what tourism is and what tourism dollars are and the impact it has. They tend to think of it in terms of just theme parks and attractions and museums and the zoo as being tourism. But tourism money is spent in all your hotel, your restaurants. It's spent at gas stations. It's spent at all kinds of services that people need. You look at me, I come down in my motor coach and stay at Isa Blanca, and I probably shop at the H-E-B and Walmart as much as anybody that lives here full time. Of course. And so anything I need is getting purchased here.
No, and we're on the border.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that you're not seeing right now that's big here is I call it retail tourism.
Yeah.
People come from Mexico, they'll stay a night or two and just shop.
Yeah.
That's all they do, just shop.
And this might surprise you, but I saw a lot of that in Nassau Bay.
Really?
Yeah, we had some upscale retail like Sakowitz, Sakowitz 2, and we would have nationals fly into Hobby Airport and take a taxi and come and shop all day long,
Right.
and take a taxi back to the airport and leave.
As
Not
much
even
stuff as
spend
they
the
can
night.
take. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
The Sakowitz was in that center that ended up failing, unfortunately. But in talking with Robert Sakowitz at the time, it was his highest grossing store per head. That the average sale was an incredible, almost $10,000.
Wow.
So they had very few people come in, but the people who came in spent
Lots of money. Yeah. So in McAllen, they have McAllen's about an hour away.
Right, sure.
But they have a mall. I think that's the highest grossing mall in the country, because
There you go.
Monterey is 2 hours away.
Yep.
And if it's not number one, it's like number two, number three.
Yeah.
But in the country, because people come and just buy everything.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So let me back up and say one of the things that I did in Nassau Bay was develop what our tourism opportunities were. And I reached out to entities and to people and places that didn't know they were a tourist business and said, you are, and I want to help you succeed. And so we had things, and you have lots of them here,
Right.
that I think are not being exploited as well as they could and should be. We had a thing called the Armen Bio Nature Center, and it was a 501c3, and they operated a little visitor center, and they had a little reserve, and it's all on government-owned land, and so they didn't have much in the way of expenses, and they had volunteer docents, and they had trails, and they would tell you stuff, and very low budget operation, and I saw them as an element of our ecotourism.
Right.
They didn't promote themselves. There was no promotion whatsoever that they were there. They were fat and happy just to be there and have their volunteers doing their thing. And I said, I'd like to help you out here. So we had produced for them very tasteful rack brochures, not gaudy ones like you're selling airboat rides, but that really talked about the nature aspect of it, and put those all over the state of Texas at all the visitor entries and all the hotels that we had and everywhere, and we pushed them, and we paid for that, and then the quid pro quo was on the back. It had a map of Nassau Bay and the location of all of our hotels and their contact information, and so we did that. So all of a sudden they saw a huge increase in their. They don't even charge admission. Right. It's just to come a visitor center and trails, and they saw a big increase in the number of visitors they were getting, which turned into them getting more volunteers and being able to do better displays, and
right.
It was a win-win.
Turns into a thing.
It was a win-win.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example of a dozen things that we went out and mined and turned into attractions that we could then pitch.
Yes. Everything's an amusement park, right?
Yeah.
So it's like everything's
turn your entire community into a music park, and those are individual attractions within your park. Exactly. Yeah, whether it's the Palo Alto battlefield or whether it's
Yeah, we have Resaca de la Palma, which is a state park, which is incredible. The infrastructure, because it's a state park and it's inside the city, and it's got paved roads. It's got, I think it's 1,200 acres.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And
birding and all this stuff, and you can go run. It's beautiful, and I don't think a lot of the people in the city know about it.
There you go.
But it's a state park, so we don't market it because it's a state park, right? But we should market it.
Yes,
absolutely. We are starting. I mean, we are starting to, but
okay. So here was another really key part. Have you ever noticed that if you go to an intersection, there'll be a gas station on every corner, or where one or two restaurants go in, 3 or 4 more restaurants go in, and that's a phenomena in marketing, that people go to a location where they know they can eat, but they haven't made up their mind yet.
Yes.
And sometimes they change their mind when they get there. And so you might think they're competitors, but they're not. There's a...
They call them something. It slipped my mind, but it's called something.
Yeah.
A food something.
Yeah.
It's called something, yeah.
So another fast food company has never spent any money on market research of where to locate. What they do is they say, we're going to be within sight of a McDonald's.
Yes.
There's more McDonald's than we have restaurants, so we're not worried about running out of places to build. So if we can see a McDonald's from a site, that's
We're
where
there.
we'll go.
Yes.
Yeah. And so people get that confused about competing. And so in Nassau Bay was a good example because we didn't have any attractions inside the city limits. NASA's not in the city. Space Center Houston's not in the city. Armen Bio's not in the city. It's in Pasadena. And so it took a little, not much. I had some really good, intelligent, and reasonable people on council to convince them that we're going to promote everybody else's attraction.
Right.
Because we got all the hotel rooms. So we're going to promote Seabrook and Kemah and the Kemah waterfront, and we're going to promote all of these things like Armen Bio because we got the closest hotel room to that.
Right.
And we're not going to be so provincial because prior to my involvement, they wouldn't spend the money on anything that wasn't inside the city limits. Well, there's no prohibition of spending it beyond that. The purpose is to get people to come and put heads in beds.
Heads in beds.
That's it.
Yeah.
So once we took those shackles off, then it was a lot easier to find venues to expand people's 4 hours and get them to come back here at the end of the day.
Right.
And so I see lots of opportunity here for that.
I think there is. The only thing that I think currently, the tourism that SpaceX is generating is, I want to call it technical tourism. People like you, right, that are really into this stuff. And there are some people that are showing up that are just for fun, some families and stuff, but the majority of people that are showing up are like you, that are like really, like you're the innovators, right? The first wave of this. Obviously, as this matures, I think there's going to be more attractions, more things, space-related. I know there is. I mean, I already know there's stuff in the works. So it's going to change. But right now, it's very, very technical. Like, it's very interesting because it's all people like you. Did you guys get a lot of people that were like super space?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. Yeah. And interestingly enough, a lot of those were multinationals. They would fly in from Europe because they had no parallel space program access in Europe, so they would come here and look at Space Center Houston and NASA and what was going on. So yeah, we had an awful lot of really hardcore space nerds.
One thing that sticks in my mind that you told me the first time I saw you is that this is the place where you can get closest to a rocket.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's never been a time or a place where you, at least in the country, I don't know if some other country, but at least in this country where you could get this close to a rocket, because where you were, it was still Defense Department or.
Yeah. That is a real unique feature here. We started with the space race, and there was certainly a military aspect to all of that, and so space development had this underlying military tone. Now NASA, is a civilian organization,
right?
But you're kidding yourself if you don't think there's a military influence, because all the first astronauts were fighter pilots and test pilots, and we're all tied to the military, and that brings with it a mindset and a defense,
mechanism. To, like, let's protect everything.
And so everything's behind fences and barbed wire, and the general public's not, everybody's a spy, and you have this whole thing that goes on, and it was just natural for them. It's just their paradigm, and at the time it may have been very well founded, but when you have a private developer and his goal is to build something that works, and everything else is on the fringe.
Yeah.
Everything else is on the fringe. I mean, this is so fast-paced here.
Crazy.
That you think you're tracking it, and you're going along, and you're going 8, 9, 10, 11.
20.
And then you go to 15. Well, what happened to 12, 13, and 14? And then 15 works. Now you're at 20.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just moving at such a fast pace.
Oh, it's nonstop. I told you we were in Nashville like 2 weeks ago, and we're over there, and then we just start looking at our phones, and they're moving the Super Heavy, and we're like, what the hell? How are it's like out of nowhere. Nobody told us, hey, we're gonna move the Super. They just like started moving it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was here.
And they stacked it.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I was here and had
You were out there?
kids and grandkids here. No.
Oh.
We were here, and because school was starting, we took the kids and went back. And the day after we left, I had taken my son-in-law out and showed him the launch table. It was at the build site. And I told him, you know, they're going to take that and they're going to put it on the launch stand over there, those big uprights. And so we're on the road home, and we made one stop at a state park. And by the time I got home, the launch table was on top, and they were moving super heavy out there. I mean, it's like 24/7. That Sunday night, in the middle of the night, they put the engines on the super heavy booster, and then the next thing you know, they're moving it out there. So yeah, it's just lightning speed.
It's crazy. I don't think anybody understands how fast this goes and how fast it is. And you go and come, right? Like you leave for a month and come back, and it's crazy different.
Yeah, you leave for a couple of days and it's different.
The guy that does a really good job, I think, or the guy that I love I'm a photographer, the documentation that I've seen is the aerial guy, the RGV.
Yeah, RGV aerial.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because that is really technical photography.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, man. I'm sure he's thinking about it now, but I don't think he knows the value. He knew the value of what he was doing when he was starting.
Yeah.
Historically, historically, it's
right.
crazy. You have documented like the progression.
Yeah.
And because this guy moves so fast, it's a fast progression, right? And you can actually show it. Like, look, 1 year, this is how much was advanced. Yeah. And there's always crazy rumors, crazy stuff, right? This week, every week is something different. This week is the tunnel. Have you heard about the tunnel?
Yes, I have.
You're at Isla Blanca now, right? So you have a little more technical savvy than me. It's like, I don't see how they would do that. No, one thing, let me tell you one thing before I let you go. Because I don't know if you know this. So that's the channel that goes to the port. Right? So because before SpaceX started ramping up, we had this whole thing where LNG is coming. 3 big, huge LNG companies are coming. There's billions of dollars being spent on the port side for this. Part of that got delayed because of COVID. And a big part of that is drenching that canal, like I think 30 more feet. So you're talking about whatever it is right now, it's not even the depth that it would have to be. It would have to be way deeper to let the LNG ships come in. So how would you do that? Can you understand that?
Sure.
Okay.
And I would use Houston Ship Channel as an example.
Okay.
Near the mouth of Houston Ship Channel, you're between the cities of LaPorte and Baytown. And they had what they called the Baytown Tunnel. And it went underneath the channel entrance to Houston. And it's 2-lane road. It had been there for decades. They removed it and replaced it with Hartman Bridge. The reason they had to do that was not that the tunnel was run out of time or failing, but they needed to deepen the channel for make it a deep water port.
Yeah.
So that said, the limiting factor has been for the ports has been what the Panama Canal can accommodate. So, you know, we've got these super container ships now.
Right.
And so they were waiting on improvements the Panama Canal before they could start sending those to us. So that said, I don't think it would be unreasonable expectation to just go deep enough to accommodate a future deepening of the channel. But what that does is, I know that some of the stuff that I saw was referencing that in Las Vegas, the convention center tunnel's 1.7 miles, for example.
Right.
And they point out that it's only 1/3 of a mile from Isla Blanca to Boca Chica Beach or Brazos Island or whichever point you want to make it to. And I think that's really kind of misleading because you're not going to drop in a hole and go through and come back up.
No.
So you're going to have a ramp space. So it's going to get much longer. You know, I admit that after reading a couple of the articles, I got my copy of Google Earth up and drew a line and kind of scoped it out and said, okay, if I was doing this, where would I do it? And you may be familiar with I'm sure you are familiar with Isla Blanca Park.
Of course.
And I would say somewhere as close as where the little like soccer field is at after you come in the gate.
Yes, that's what I figured.
You figure there, or if you needed more length of run, back up and start just before you get to where the existing gate is at,
right?
And reconfigure that
right around there. I think there's even some space next to in front of Schlitterbahn.
Yeah,
that area on the side.
Yeah,
I mean there's several.
And then you shoot out underneath the Boy Scout at the point past the convention center where the Boy Scouts have got the point, and that is the shortest distance across the channel and come up. But I think it's all completely feasible to do.
Having said that, wouldn't a bridge be easier?
You know, a bridge would be easier, I suppose.
Cheaper?
I'm not sure how much cheaper it would be. And
it would have to open. Same thing with the ships, right? Because the ships go through there. So
and I think the maintenance costs would be significantly higher. You'd be more susceptible. Now, you're going to have flooding risks with hurricane. But the tunnel is not vulnerable to hurricanes as much as a bridge is. You can move traffic when the winds are up through a tunnel when you can't on a bridge. You see that with the Queen Isabella Bridge now. You get to a certain threshold of winds and you have to stop traffic.
Right.
Well, with a tunnel, that's not the case. That's driven by tide, not by wind. So you can still keep moving. And ships can keep, it's easier for ships to get taller than for the ships to get deeper.
Right.
So there's pros and cons to all of that. It's, I'm sure, just one of many things that are being...
It's the crazy thing we're talking about this week.
Kicked around.
Yeah, so it's like every week is something different. Yeah. The other thing I want to ask you, just because I don't know anything, so I use you for a lot of the information, as you know, when I send you messages. Is there 30 Raptors on this thing, on the Super Heavy, something like that?
Yeah, it's like 28, 29.
Okay.
They've got a couple different configurations, but yeah.
How loud is that going to be? Is that feasible to do it there with the audio that would come out?
Well, that's a good question. It's going to be loud.
Yeah, that's what I said. I don't know anything, but I know that these things are like stand out to me. Like that's going to be loud, right?
Yeah, and sound is very interesting. The way sound travels. The lower the frequency, the further it travels. But sound is like light. It falls off pretty quickly. And at the shore of Isla Blanca, you're 5.1 miles from the launch facility. So you're a pretty good distance. I mean, I haven't looked at any calculations or done anything on the sound, but I'm sure somebody has because they had been,
right.
You know, they're not building the orbital launch platform without having given some
Well, I guess Isla Blanca has to be the first consideration, right? Because that's probably the closest that they can't block off, right? Because they can block off all the way, I guess, to the beginning of what we call Boca Chica or Highway 4. So you don't have people there. But Isla Blanca is, right. I mean, the sound can't, blow people away there. So, and I think Mexico's even closer.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I don't know if there's neighborhoods, but that would be interesting to find out too. But that's what was like to me. It was like, how are you going to do that there? I know that there's future plans of going into the ocean and actually launching from there, right, with these rigs or something like that.
Yeah.
But if they're going to test this thing there, I was like, that's going to be loud. It was loud before.
Yeah, they're gonna certainly have a number of launches here.
So you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen.
You think FAA clears up? So FAA is now okay?
Well,
you think
that's thrown out there, and there's a couple different things. There's launch clearance, and then there's the environmental assessment issue that's still out there that wants to be rehashed.
So so that's one important thing to talk about. So we were, like we said, this thing was moving lightning speed. Like when we met, it was crazy, right? These guys were like launching, and I was like, hey, we'll do it next week again. Yeah. And it was getting crazy.
Yeah.
And then it stopped. And one of the reasons, because the Super Heavy, right? They needed Super Heavy, and now we're going to do this orbital test. But then these issues popped up all at the same time, right? What I see like a stacked of issues, right? One was with local, right? They had an issue with the district attorney, where not SpaceX and said, but SpaceX security company, whoever they hire, right, was like, I guess, taking on authority they didn't have.
A little overzealous.
Yes, and they did it to a DA, which I would imagine they didn't know it was the district attorney, or the guy was from the district attorney's office, right? Then there's this other thing with the county, where the amount of hours that they've closed up that street goes beyond the agreement that was originally signed, and then there's obviously that opens up the new that they didn't say it was going to be this type of rocket, right? It was supposed to be another type of rocket. So the environmental impact study was made for this rocket. Not that it would be that much different for this one, but technically, and this is all stuff that I've heard, right? I don't know if I've got it all exactly correct, but that, right? And then the FAA issues with, hey, debris or stuff that happened during the other test, right? So all these things stacked up, and now he's got to like check them all off before he can do it.
Yeah.
Right. So that to me, it's like, so what out of those things would have stood up to you, and what do you think they've already like overcome?
I think all of that is manageable. I don't see any of that being a showstopper. I've worked in government a long time.
Yeah.
And, I had previously mentioned I have 21 years of law enforcement. And as a space fan, I went out there when they were moving one of the pieces of equipment. They were moving one of the crawlers back empty. And I wanted to get a video of that. And I stood on the corner out there by the corner where you come into Boca Chica Village, right next to the stop sign.
Yes.
And I stood there because I knew that was in the street right away.
Right.
You don't put a stop sign on the private property. And the crawler was coming, and the truck was coming, and I had my video all set up, a tripod, and one of the security guys in his Tesla drove down, and the pickup truck stopped him, and he backed up, and he came over, and he told me I had to move across the street. Well, I know he has no authority to do that, but I'm not down there to, shake trees and make problems. So, fine, I'll move across the street. I didn't argue that point. And it was only about a week and a half later that the deal with the district attorney happened. And, I am a SpaceX fan, but I know that they were overreaching and closing down those county roads and claiming it as if it was theirs exclusively. It ain't right.
No.
So I don't have any hard feelings about any of that. I thought that from my perspective, and I don't have any inside knowledge, and I've not participated in any of that, but I thought that drawing in from the prosecutor's perspective, the agreement on the road closures, that's not criminal law. That's an agreement. Agreements can be changed at any time. And I felt then the roles reversed, and I thought the district attorney was stretching that, throwing that up in there.
Well, I think, and you're the government guy, right? But politicians, that's a really good way to renegotiate all kinds of things, right? Yeah. So it's like, hey, you already passed over here, so we need to talk about this other thing that probably we're not hearing about.
Well, so that can get solved. Push comes to shove, you're right. It gets down to politics and political things. Certainly, there are lots of examples of where companies have been in similar situations over a very long time, where the county just gives the road up. That happens.
Right.
The value of having the business operating, and we did that in Nassau Bay when they built a shopping center. We went and gave up the road. Yeah.
The only issue with that is obviously why they're talking about the tunnel. Why is the beach, right? The only issue with that is...
I'm not talking about the state highway. I'm just talking about the county roads.
Yeah, the county roads. Yeah.
State highway is a whole nother issue, and much tougher. And that cuts both ways, because I'm sure that SpaceX would like to have more control over the state highway,
right?
Both traveling it and the right-of-way access of parking and such, and they do a pretty good job with bluffing with white cones and
Yeah.
you know, trying to channel people. And again, I understand their purpose, and so I don't really fault that too much. I mean, you certainly have a lot of neighborhoods where people put things out in front of their house to keep you from parking there when it's a public road.
Right.
People can park there, and local government kind of looks the other way because, you know, they maintain it as their lawn and it's not their property, but we let that slide.
Having said that, I mean, it's not like I think that they're like being bad community member or anything like that. I mean, actually, I think they've done a lot of outreach. Yeah. You know, both with actual like donating money, like Elon put up and all that, but also people that I've met. Right, there's a community outreach program that they have, and they'll go visit, and we've met with them, and they've become part of like putting community groups that maybe need help with people that are here from Tesla, or I mean from SpaceX working, and need something to do on the weekend, right? So hey, how about you do this fundraiser for this foundation that really needs it? So they've been very good neighbors. I have to say that it's not like they haven't, but that whole issue with the beach and with those wetlands, right? The reserve there.
Right.
Those are the two, like, very, you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Because this guy moves so fast that by the time you know it, it's gone.
Yeah.
And then what happens, right? And then it comes like, oh, we ruined this thing that was, you know, such unique, so unique for us. One of the big things that I think you know that the area is known for is birding, right? We're one of the valley, in essence, is probably one of the best birding places in the country.
Right.
And Boca Chica is a reserve for that kind of stuff, right? And so I just think that point, right, that there has to be very careful, very like, how do we do it? And I don't know if politicians are the right ones to manage that, because it's more of a, we want business, we want progress. So it becomes touchy, because I really want this thing to go. I want to go to Mars, right? I mean, I don't want to go to Mars, but I want them to go to Mars, right? So, so that's where it becomes like with the community. How we manage that? You know, that's what it's tricky. It's tricky how fast it goes. That's what makes it. I think you don't know.
Yeah, but I think there's a good balance there. I have worked with NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, 1968, on a number of projects on both sides, both from the government perspective and from the activist side, taking advantage of that law to impact projects that I thought were negative.
Right.
And so, you know, neither side wins 100%. It's not black and white. There's a lot of compromise and working to get to the end. There's frustration on both sides. I know that you know, people complain about snail darters or, you know, something that stops a project.
Right.
But at the same time, people complain about companies who are able to do things impacting environmental sensitive areas, because it's also set up so that they can go acquire other private land and set it aside.
Right.
So it's a swap, and so it's all designed so that it's not used as a complete roadblock to stop everything from having progress.
It's so we had a big fight, not a big fight, but we had a fight about LNG in the community before SpaceX started all this stuff. SpaceX was already kind of here, but they weren't. It was when they weren't really here. They were here, but not really.
Right.
So this whole thing about LNG, the shipping channel that I told you, so there were going to be more like storage, more all this infrastructure is being developed right now. So obviously, people at the island, those communities that have a lot of water, were very concerned, right, of any kind of environmental impact. So there was a huge fight. There didn't seem to be one for SpaceX because it just crept up so quickly. And then this guy just moved very quickly that they're just starting to be like these things like, whoa, wait, right? That with LNG, it was like, well, way before, way planned out. Now it doesn't happen. So one question that I do have for you is in Nassau Bay, was there environmental damage being caused by any tests that they were doing in NASA or anything like that? that you guys could quantify?
Yeah, not that we were actively involved with. And there may have been in the very early days, and they worked with hypergolic fuels there, which are extremely hazardous. And they put it in the far back corner of their big site to get it as far away from any of their office space as possible. And then, of course, as the area developed, that ended up being a budding all residential and a university property. So, but I'm not aware of anything that we dealt with there from the environmental perspective.
Yeah,
but I can tell you, I was city manager of Shore Acres, Texas for 13 years, and we were right up against the Bayport ship channel, container and chemical channel. And there were noise issues from the operation of the container ships. And the bigger the ships got, the higher the containers were up in the air. And then when they put them on the ships or take them off, they bang against each other and make a huge noise. And they would also run the engines. They had engines on the deck of the ships that would run, and the noise to the neighborhood was sometimes really bad. So we worked with the port on reducing the noise pollution. But one of the things the port also did noise easements, and they would pay you thousands of dollars to have an easement for your property that says you can't complain about the noise.
Wow.
And a lot of people jumped on that. I was not a fan of that because of some of the other terms and conditions that were in that, but that's a private choice between you and the Port of Houston, and it passes with the property. So it's kind of like the person that builds a house by an airport before there's jets, and then there's jets, and and then there they are. So those issues happen. I know a lot of people would like to see this particular launching site be somewhere else, and there's just an awful lot of variables in that.
Yeah, I do think that, luckily, I think we're moving forward, and it's too late for them to leave, hopefully, because I know, that could happen too. But hopefully we're far enough along and if this whole ever lawsuit with Bezos and this thing clears up, they're already set up here for that. So I'm hoping that, this is long term and that this doesn't drive them away or anything. I'm just concerned a little bit, because I live here. So, but I think it's incredible. I mean, do you think he's going to be able to go to Mars from here?
I don't think they intend to go to Mars from here.
Where do you think they're going to do it from?
From Florida.
You think so?
Yeah. I think that this is like the R&D site to do this research and development and work out all the kinks and automate the construction process. That's for me, as I look at it, that's a big part of it. Being able to build the boosters and the spaceships as rapidly as possible, which requires a lot of automation. And once they have all of the system worked out, I think that you'll see the operations, the routine operations will all shift to Florida just because of launch facility issues as being also where you insert into the orbit.
Right.
If you're doing polar orbits, you go out to the West Coast, and otherwise if you're doing equatorial orbits, you're leaving from Florida. And I think the long range plan is that
they're going to go from Florida.
Yeah. And also I think that the sea platforms, the platforms
the rigs,
are also going to be an element of that. The offshore platforms, but I think that when we look back at it, or look forward 5-8 years, I think you'll see them launching regularly from Florida and not from here.
So even the moon project that they're talking about would probably launch from Florida because it would be this rocket, right, that would go to the moon?
Yes, and that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no.
I'm not basing that on, I don't have any inside information. I just, as I'm reading the tea leaves, those projects will launch from Florida.
So let's go back to this thing about launching and the equator and everything you were talking about. I heard, and like I said, I don't know anything, So I heard if they launch Super Heavy with the rocket on top from here, that it lands somewhere in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, the trajectory it has here would leave from Boca Chica and head out over the Gulf towards Cuba, and then it would pass over the end of Florida and Cuba and go on around the world 3/4 of the way, and then drop in about 60 kilometers from a Hawaiian island.
Wow. And so you're saying if you do it from Florida, it's a different trajectory?
That's as close to the Florida trajectory as they can get, I think. Yeah, because they go out over the Atlantic to do the orbit insertion, and so if you were like in Central Texas, you would be over populated area all the way till you got to the Atlantic, and they want to have much more altitude than that before they go over populated areas.
Okay, so but that test is going to happen, right?
Yes.
So that's what they're working on now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're going to launch from here.
Yeah.
Somehow this thing is going to land in Hawaii. And that's the next phase of what we've been living.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So the booster will land in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Starship will continue on. Will hit an orbit apogee, but they're not going to insert it into orbit. So they're not going to do a burn to place it into orbit so that it re-enters, and then they will land it near Hawaii. And the idea is to do a propulsion landing, so it'll do the same flip and just land like it's landing on the pad, only it'll land on the water.
And Super Heavy will land here, back here, right, with these little arms or whatever.
No, not on this one. It's going to just splash into the Gulf.
Oh, this time it's not going to catch it. Or
they're going to try to do. My understanding is they're going to try to do a Falcon 9 style landing. So it won't do a belly flop and those maneuvers, but it will come back in and we'll do a propulsive landing and slow down and then hit the water.
Okay.
Like it's landing on the water.
How deep? How far?
Well, that's a good question because I don't think they've
thought about that.
They've decided if they're going to do a. See, there's another burn to turn when you turn around to come back. So like a Falcon 9 goes off, and then they do a burn to bring it back so it's closer to shore when they land. And so that's a fuel and weight consideration, and whether they want to try to do that with this first test or not. And so if they're going to just be 20, 50 miles offshore, they're going to have to do a burn to bring it back. Otherwise, it's going to be several hundred miles offshore.
Right.
And they could do either one. It's just a matter of how many things they want to pile on this particular test. And things that drag it out, I think, tend to add more things to what they'll do.
Right.
So
all this time has been helping.
Yeah, I think that they're anxious to test certain parts of it and move as fast as they can to do that. But they can't test anything until they finish the tank farm and they finish the quick disconnect arm, because they have to have that before they can fuel the Starship.
Oh, okay.
And so they have to have the tank farm to fuel anything, and then they have to have that arm to fuel the Starship, because this will be the first one. SM-20 is the first one that will fuel from the side instead of the bottom.
Oh.
And so...
And they fuel it, so then, I don't know if I've got this correct, but the Super Heavy, then they're going to stack this on top, and then this arm is going to connect and fuel it.
Correct. So they'll put the liquid fuels in it with the arm, and they'll fuel the booster from the bottom. And you've probably heard them describe both of these as like tin cans. When they're hollow, they're not as strong. So I suspect what will happen is they'll start pressurizing and fueling the booster ahead of doing anything with the Starship, so that it has rigidity.
Right, it's holding.
And then they fuel this, and then off we go. And of course, another twist in all of this is we've been watching them do launches here from January, through rapidly, and they would do static fires and change engines and do static fires and do all this in preparation. We'd watch all that happen and then a launch. you can't do a static fire when it's stacked.
Right.
So the static fire for this one is going to be on one of the suborbital pads, and when the static fire testing is all done, then they'll stack it. So the confidence level of the engines is going to have to ramp up pretty good for it to be a continuous operation.
Right, to be able to do it all the time.
Yeah, where you're not having that last minute. I mean, they're getting ready to send a cargo ship up on the wee hour of the morning here this weekend up to International Space Station with a Falcon 9, and I think today they did the static fire test. So there's a system that's pretty well proven.
Right.
This is like the 27th cargo resupply that they're doing, and they're still static firing those engines to make sure it's all good.
That's going to be very interesting. So they're going to develop the whole system from here, and right now they're just testing. So is that part of why they announced the ramp up at McGregor?
Oh yeah, it's going to take a lot of engines. I mean, we've got 28, 29 engines on the booster, and then you're going to have 6 engines on the Starship. So you'll have 3 Raptors and 3 RVACs, vacuum Raptor engines on there. So there's 6 engines. Every one of those engines is never coming back. They're all going in the ocean.
Yeah.
So they're already working on the next super heavy booster.
Okay, but that amount of engines, right? The 28 and the 6, right? It's 28.
Yes.
6. So okay, that amount of engines is what it takes to go to Mars.
It'll take more engines than that to go
That's
to Mars.
that's what I'm like. Okay.
Yeah, because you're going to have to. They're going to put the Starship in orbit, then they're going to refuel it, and then there's lots of discussion about how you refuel.
Yeah, is there going to be a gas station? How are they doing this?
So you've got to get the tough part is the lift getting off the surface of Earth, getting up to space.
Okay.
And then if you use all your fuel to do that,
right, you're out.
then you're going to need some more to carry on. When you look like the Saturn V, it just kept losing pieces that never returned, and did its mission to the moon and then came back, and it was just all single use, and it just kept carving pieces off that had its own fuel. And so fuel management is a really big part of all of that. And that was just for the moon, and Mars is going to be more challenging.
How do you think this guy calculates all these things? I mean, you're saying it very easily, but obviously all these calculations, this has never been done, and he's leading this whole thing, and at the same time he's building cars, wants to build a tunnel. I mean,
well, he's brilliant.
Yeah, but it's another level of brilliance. This guy,
and he's a visionary. Well, we've had some people in our history that have been brilliant like that.
But in our history, you're talking about this guy's like we were talking before. This is just like having him. He's kind of a historical figure already.
Yeah, and
it's very strange to have him like here in your community, and
But take Edison for an example. What's Edison known for? I mean, it's a wide variety of technology. I mean, from motion pictures to light bulbs.
You think that their brains just
electricity.
Fire all the time on all these different things, and they're like, I have to do all of them?
I think that some people never put their brain in neutral.
Yeah.
And they're always pushing, and he surrounds himself with a lot of other brilliant people.
Yeah.
He's the conductor of the orchestra, and he doesn't have to play all the instruments.
No, but he obviously has to be a very good leader.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, what amazes me is not only is he doing this stuff, right? He's leading the industry in cars, in automotive. Like, he's not just building cars. He's leading. He's better than Toyota, which is an incredible company, right? I mean, American companies are good too, but Toyota's supposed to be this and he's beating them.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to launch rockets and build tunnels.
And build tunnels and do
flamethrowers,
do internet satellites
Yeah.
and
it's
artificial intelligence.
a crazy amount. And I don't see Bezos like that. I mean, he's obviously brilliant, right? Obviously a incredible businessman. The Virgin Air guy, he's brilliant. But they're even Mark Zuckerberg, but they're not like this guy.
Yeah.
This guy's like a superhero.
Yeah. And it's a different drive, I think. I think he's driven to do the things that he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah, you could tell kind of like these early geniuses like Mark Zuckerberg, where they were very young and came up with something that revolutionized the world. But he's kind of in it for business now. You can kind of tell, like, this guy's in it for business. And you never sense this with this. He's like, I'm building this car, and I'm open sourcing it, and anybody can do it.
Okay, so he's an entrepreneur on a scale like, unseen, because he's also willing to risk it all.
Right.
And I don't think that a lot of those others
No.
that you reference are willing to risk it all.
No.
And
Comfortable.
And you look at how close he came to losing everything with Falcon 9 trying to do that rocket. He had faith in it, and he was confident and just pressed on. And
I think he came close to losing it all with the Roadster when he was building the Tesla car.
Yeah.
He's like, he's very aggressive,
right.
but incredible. It's an incredible thing to have him in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And to have him, right across the pond from you.
Yeah, doing miracles.
Doing miracles.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy you came. I'm very excited. I think we can go on forever, right? Because I'm very inquisitive, and I like that you have all these like hobbies and directions we can go in, right? We didn't even talk about the Round Top weekend over there. So hopefully we can do it again. I'm very thankful that you came. And where can people find you, like if they want to follow what you're doing? Because I know you take a lot of pictures. Yeah. You always have media wherever you go. So,
yeah, actually, probably the easiest would just be on Facebook, and I'm not hard to find. It's David Stahl, Stall, on Facebook. And depending on what their level of interest is and things they want to engage with, I can point them in other.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're interested in anything like this and you're listening, I know because I've done it. You send him a message and he'll send you all kinds of information on anything you want to know. Especially the great thing he's good at is guessing when the launch is going to be, which is why I always usually bother you. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
All right, bye-bye.